I was going to talk about how my company, in a way, has been, if you like, at the receiving end of assumptions and judgments. But I realise that I'm guilty of making assumptions and judgments myself. Birch Hamilton, who's the arranger of this, and Fernanda, came over to London some months ago to talk to me about appearing here. And I made a really bad assumption, and I've realised over the last few days how wrong my assumption was. My assumption was that because of what I'm about to discuss with you, that I would be up here as a kind of Aunt Sally, the kind of antichrist to the creatives. If you don't know what my company does, you'll find out in a minute. But we really are people who are involved in the appliance of technology and some science to the creative process. And sometimes we've had conversations in the past, and we know it's anathema. You know, people react very adversely to it. But it's very interesting, the conclusion that we just had from Meany, and where I'm about to start now, because it's very interesting how these kind of worlds collide, where the status quo effectively can be threatened by new ways of doing things. That's kind of aggressive language, but let's see. So Friend or Foe was the title we came up with for my little section now, because as I was talking in the Soho Hotel in trendy Soho in London some months ago with Fernanda and Birch at the back there, and they were asking me to explain what we do, as I'm about to, their eyebrows gradually arched, and I assumed it was with horror as we explained what you're about to hear. But now I'm thinking they were actually very, very clever and Machiavellian, and they actually saw a theme. Big surprise, they're arranging the conference. There is a theme, and I think it does carry on. So you can decide at the end of this if what I'm about to describe is friend or foe of the creative process, or you might also decide perhaps it's a false opposition. But anyway, it's a little bit of fun to condense into a short amount of time something which can be quite complex. So I'm going to give you some information before you judge. I hope you'll be kind. And just for a bit of fun, we've set it up a little bit like a trial. So here's some background information. Okay, now, some of you may know this, some of you may not know this. I mean, I'm going to talk pretty much about Hollywood movies in this discussion, not independent movies, not the movies that Jim Sheridan, who I also met last night, makes, not about TV, although my company works in both those fields as well, but in Hollywood. And although you may not realise it, there's every reason why people in Hollywood might be nervous about making creative decisions, because an awful lot of money is at stake. You can see some of the statistics back there. Some of those may not surprise you, but I think the one which is surprising is that the kind of scripts that a company like mine works on have actually been through many, many pairs of eyes before they make their way to us. They've been through research and development, they've been through offices full of prestigious Ivy League graduates, lots of people have opined on them. And the curious thing is, by the time a product or a potential product gets in front of my company, they've spent, this is a very precise figure, but this is what the studios say, they spent about $14 million already. And they call it making a movie pregnant. And this is before it's even greenlit. And greenlight means they've made a confirmed decision to go ahead and make the movie. So there's a lot of cash at stake. And whatever your feelings about Hollywood are, and about the sometimes obscene amounts of money out there, it's in no one's interest if they're wasting that money. You know, a rising tide raises all boats. A studio that loses lots of money isn't going to be able to make smaller films as well as the large films which seem to predominate these days. So there's a lot of money, a lot of big bets. Now, in most industries, big bets like that are only made when all the available evidence and risk management has been put in place. And this is the thing which doesn't sound like the creative process. I mean, risk management, for God's sake. I worked in the City of London when the idea for this kind of approach to movies came about. And very, very briefly, I worked in risk management, although I was new to it. Risk management is the second cousin, once removed, of insurance. So not terribly glamorous. Looking at these young faces around here, you know, none of you look like you're about to run away and join the insurance industry. And I don't blame you. But a couple of interesting things came my way while I was there. Number one, a bit prosaic. Insurance is based on calculations, you know, usually about when we'll die. And actuaries are the people that make those calculations. And there's not a lot of them available. Certainly 10 years ago, if you were an actuary in London, you could name your price. And they do calculations about lifespan and related things. Not a lot of actuaries around. And it came to my attention through a former colleague of mine from New York, but an English guy, that there are these marvelous bits of software called neural networks which could do fantastic calculations. either in real time, taking live feeds of data, or in batches. You could add data, and they could perform marvellous calculations. So we were exploring where we could use them there in the City of London. And in fact, they are used all over these days in trading, gold trading, pork belly trading, weather forecasting. So neural networks are out there, and they're a very powerful thing. And they lend themselves well to the agglomeration of data and the analysis of patterns within it. Number two, I had a fantastic conversation with the guy that ran our company's so-called Hollywood division. And part of my job involved asking people what they did that was very different from the rest of the organisation. In other words, why are you a separate division is kind of the question. And this seminal conversation with the chap that ran our Hollywood division was so curious, because I said, what is special about working with Hollywood? And I thought he might say, well, you know, these days films cost this much money. A lot of films don't make their money back. You know, the big fundamental underlying risk of our industry is we're spending too much on the wrong projects. That's what I expected him to say. His response was, the biggest problem we face is there are so many animals on film sets these days, and they crap everywhere, and people keep slipping up. So there's an awful lot of property casualty. And I said, no, I'm new. Are you pulling my leg? No, this is the God's honest truth. And I inquired further about, you know, the financial dimensions of the real underlying risk. And it seemed that the industry I was then working in wasn't addressing this fundamental thing. And remember, I'm not talking about independent films. I'm talking about Hollywood at this moment. Big, big risks, lots of money, and people struggling to understand how they might, if you like, put a wicket keeper or a backstop in there to try and make sure that they invested in the right projects and they made the right money. So already we're moving away from creative notions and into the finance of the thing, which I think is very important. So long story short, I saw these opportunities, and with friends and colleagues and very, very bright people, we set up this little company called Epagogix, where we have human beings, actual people, not technology, not machines, who formerly were working in the analysis of TV. And they were analysing how well TV programs would do on American networks. And with them, we developed a system which looked at movies in kind of the same way. Human beings read scripts, so far the same as any script doctor in Hollywood. But what we've done that's very clever is we've codified these things, and it's taken an awful long time, but they look at scripts and they break them down into many, many component parts. Now you look like an intelligent bunch, so I'm not going to tell you all the parts. I'm not allowed to. But, you know, it could be big things like cast and talent. It could be location. It could be supporting characters. But then there's many, many, many slices of information which are scored. So human beings ascribe a score to these things. And these scores are introduced to a neural network. And in a minute, I'll show you a little bit more about neural networks. But these fantastically powerful algorithms will then take this data, and with it, they will make a forecast about the likely box office outcome of a particular project before any more cash has been spent on it than the $14 million. Okay, so if you're about to spend another 100 million on making your film and another 100 million to produce it, you can see why this might be a sort of welcome piece of objectivity. I mean, you can't see that from the 2 minutes of glibness I've given you, but you know, after our whole process, it becomes far more rational. So that's what we started doing. And one of the studios that we work with has a very, very savvy chairman, and very shortly after we started, if you like, selling this forecast, he said, well, look, I understand your process is breaking things down into pieces. Presumably your guys, expert analysts, are ascribing scores which are less than the maximum in certain areas. He said, I'd like to know what those areas are, and I'd like to know how to make them better. So over time, the process has developed. It's actually now quite iterative and collegial. We give a number, we explain why we got that number, which is the box office forecast, and we actually will then work with the folks there to try and enhance the potential of that particular script in a very collegial way. So that's the enhancements. So what we're using is an expert process with artificial intelligence. So far, no one's thrown anything at me, so I'm not the Antichrist. Perhaps I'm being blinded by the light, but I'm not quite Antichrist. So in many other industries, this kind of approach is really quite normal these days, and it's all about evidence-based decision-making. Yeah? And I would say, you know, even Charles Dickens, even W.B. Yeats somehow had an editor. You know, so there is always some kind of intervention, I'd say, in most creative processes. We've kind of taken it to, it sounds like a science fiction extreme, but it is kind of practical and rooted in the creative process. We understand the importance of stories, but the cute thing is we can quantify this quite accurately. Now, our accomplices in this crime, the clients, they could be financiers of films, and you can understand why they'd be interested in just the bloodthirsty number, and also film companies themselves, independents and TV stations, TV broadcasters. They're very, very interested in both the creative part of the information and how that may then translate into business decisions. And I can give you an example. A script we looked at about 18 months ago, we didn't know that it had originated with a very famous star. We just got it from the studio. 2 characters involved, a male, a female. Clearly they were on a trajectory to find some kind of love. You never saw them on screen together. One of them had a very, very strong and interesting career to do with kind of the modern Wild West. The other was a singer. They had lots and lots of friends. And there in the script, my analyst saw that they were pursuing parallel lines. They seldom intersected. You seldom saw them on the same space as a member of the audience. Right? It's about the audience, just like the previous speaker, Meany explained, about the audience. And the audience would be wondering, where is the romance in this romance? So we did our stuff in more detail than I'm giving you now. And we said, look, you really need to decide who the audience is following on this journey. There are too many people. There's too much going on. The 2 characters who are supposed to be in love don't seem to be in love. You don't see them in love. So focus on one. So that's a real creative suggestion, but we've quantified it. We've said, in this way, the film will earn this much. If you can fix this, it'll earn this much more. To our surprise, as we're delivering this information in person, and we don't deliver this to the writers, by the way. In Hollywood itself, we've never met a writer. We always meet suits. And they might call themselves creatives, but they're suited. And they, in turn, will finally talk to the writer. And the response we got from the very nice and very intelligent suit we were talking to was, thank you so much for saving me $12 million. And I said, well, how the hell have we saved you $12 million? They said, you don't know it, but this script came from Mr. X, who everyone in this room knows. And he said, okay, yes, so you're going to focus on the man. Yes. And who we had lined up for, Mrs. Y was very, very famous actress. She cost $12 million for this movie, and you're saying, we don't need it to be such a big part. I don't need such a big actress. I said, well, look, we're not saying that specifically, but you're taking our creative enhancement and turning it into management information, business information. So it's interesting how those things not collide, but perhaps allied, how they fit together. So, the creative and the business sit side by side. All right, so scrolling forward, or scrolling backward and then forward. First time ever in Hollywood. This is me. Me and 3 colleagues. 2 from Epagogix. 1 was a financier who now, many years later, is with Epagogix. He had money to spend in his pocket at the time. We had a meeting arranged by the head of a studio in Britain, with the head of the studio in Hollywood. British Airways lost my suitcase. I'm sitting there in yesterday's clothing, feeling disheveled, expecting to meet the chairman of the studio. In walks in the legal counsel, a guy about the age that I am now. And you can guess what that is, but not out loud. Thank you very much, you swine. I'm feeling it. So the guy walks in, and this is the first thing he says to us. This is my very first morning in Hollywood. How about this for conviviality, working together, blue hat, red hat, yellow hat? And I've cleaned it up. So very aggressive. So my first was, well, who are you? You're not the very famous chairman of the studio who we thought to meet. Couldn't care less. And as part of the conversation, as it progressed, one of the chaps with us, the financier, actually had $50 million to spend that day, which isn't really a lot in Hollywood, but look, real people, $50 million is a lot of money. He said, look, I'm here to show I understand neural networks. I'm from banking. I understand what these guys can do. I've seen their tests, how accurate they are. I'm prepared to co-invest in a couple of movies just as a sort of show of good faith so we can get going with you. And to our amazement, the guy on the other side who was protecting the status quo, and that really is what Meany was talking about, said, I don't need your money. I've got everything. I've got the car. I've got the houses. I meet the stars. I'm saying, what's it got to do with you? He said, and we've got enough stupid money in this town. And at that time, I'll tell you, I mean, it was quite right, it turned out he did. A lot of German tax funds were investing at that time in Hollywood. So the guy was totally disinterested. And I thought this was appalling. What a dysfunctional town. And I have to say, my finance colleague kicked me under the table because he thought I might punch this chap who was just so, you know, the Puritan in you comes out. You think, you work for a company, you must do the best for the company and the best for your audience. You can't be so hostile to something which doesn't even threaten your position. It might threaten some other positions, but not yours. My colleague said, you know what, in a dysfunctional town like this, we're going to do okay. Eventually. And our eventually actually came quite quickly. The very next day, and I'm just rejigging this bit based on the previous presentation. The very next day, we saw another film studio chairman. And that guy had been smitten by Moneyball. Have you heard of Moneyball? The book and the film? He'd had Billy Beane, the manager of the team, the baseball team, in talking to his senior executives precisely about what Meany was just saying, about how inside experts sometimes don't have it right. Sometimes long experience of a subject also should give you wisdom and vision, sometimes doesn't give you perspective. And he clearly was trying to work with his executives about not going on guts, not going on relationships, but trying to be objective. And in fact, this very chairman, the first time we met him, was at the boardroom table, surrounded by sheaves and sheaves of computer printout with some kind of data. And he's the chairman. You know, he's not the accountant, he's not the CFO. He was trying to work out something or other. And clearly he was trying to drill down through data to find information. And he took us on. And the very next year, instead of having the Moneyball people speak to his executives, he had the famous Malcolm Gladwell, who I'm sure you've all heard of, also spoke to his senior execs. Malcolm Gladwell asked them what was wrong with the film industry, what were the challenges which are manifest and manifold. Gladwell then asked them, what do you think could change this? And to my enduring thanks and amazement, apparently they mentioned our little company and said, here's an outfit that looks at things objectively and can quantify and can give us some useful information. And Gladwell was intrigued. And breaking the NDA, which we had between ourselves and the studio, Gladwell approached us. He wrote a very seminal article about us, which is when my little company first came above the radar. And, you know, you can't buy this kind of publicity. And what he says there follows on so directly from Meany. So thank you again, Birch, for this thematic continuation. You know, we're not intimidated by the boundaries of knowledge. We don't defer to the superior expertise of outsiders. And indeed, the studio we work with routinely calls us, and it's quite embarrassing, they call us the geeks in the basement, or the London geeks in the basement. My colleagues are highly offended by this. They think of themselves as being creatives. So it shows you, it depends where you sit in that ABC diagram, how you think of yourself. So I'm going to give you just a couple of quick minutes on neural networks. I'm assuming that most of you don't really know what they are, and I'm assuming that in 2 minutes I'm not going to be able to tell you truly what they are. But neural networks are a kind of software. You can buy them in the shop that sells neural networks, but they don't work until you've then built them with data specific to the subject you're looking at, specific to what you're trying to forecast. So if you are a trader in gold, and you have a neural network to help you decide whether to buy, sell, or hold your gold holdings, you might have decided that the GDP in the USA this month and a year ago this month might be important. The exchange rate between the euro and the dollar might be important. The price of gasoline, petrol, might be important. You might have made lots and lots of factors that are important, and then the interaction between all of those factors in the past has had a known outcome. This is going to confuse you, this one. So think of it in grid terms, okay? So horizontally is every day for the last 10 years, okay? The very final column, the output, if you're a gold trader, might be that daily spot price of gold. So in the past, you know all these factors, and you know what the price of gold was. Today, you get all of those factors included in. Do you like my hand illustrations? All the different verticals factored in. And a neural network really cleverly, and really quickly, will work out how those combination of factors will impact the output, which in this silly little example is the price of gold. And it's used in that way. So it takes all this information in the past and in what they call a non-linear way, works out what these new combination of factors is most like. And it is non-linear. It's a world where 2 + 2 does not necessarily equal 4, even if you use Edward de Bono's sensible way of working things out. You can get very surprising outcomes. And essentially, we have built neural networks for movies and also for TV, which do the same thing. And this is the bit that sounds like heresy to the creative process. We have built these things on film data, broken down in the way I described earlier, so that if today we got a script, my colleagues scored it, they give it to the chaps in Oxford who run the neural networks, it will come out with an output, which is usually very, very, very accurate. But neural networks are called neural networks because like our brain, you don't put those hats on, there's no silver hats with wires coming out, but like our neurals, they learn. So if we took a script today that we'd scored 10 years ago and put in the same scores in the neural network, the output, the end column of the last slide, the output would probably be different because in those 10 years, the neural network has been fed hundreds and hundreds, thousands of extra bits of information, and so it may now know different things than it did 10 years ago. So the theory is it gets more accurate over time. It absorbs changes, including, if you like, market changes, because they're all included in the overall combination of data. All right, so this might be what some of you are thinking now, because we're all creative in this room, aren't we? This was a meeting. I did not have this meeting. My American colleague had this meeting with a very famous person. Again, those of you who know movies will know this guy. You'll know his partner, who was a very famous child actor and now a very famous director. And I had a great meeting, a great lunch in one of those places like Spago's in Hollywood. Things were going great. And at the end, my colleague was absolutely astonished, to get a big question mark in the middle of what he said. He was absolutely astonished to have the most pleasant and polite, cut me to the quick insult delivered. This is revolting, on a par with developing nuclear bombs. I mean, that is just marvelous. I mean, the postscript to that was, on leaving, his assistant said to my colleague, "It's really quite an achievement to be so disliked by him." He doesn't really get exercised like that. He's Mr. Calm, and he is known in Hollywood as being, a very calm guy. And I thought, God help us. And this guy, funnily enough, is both a writer, but also a business person. But he is used to pleasing himself, and his judgment is good. So he will not defer to outsider judgment because he's been very successful, but his judgment is very good. 5 minutes, thank you very much. My timing isn't bad, my judgment is good. So on the other side, so if that's a witness for the prosecution, and you kind of understand where he's coming from, the guy that first led us into one of our studios in Hollywood, sadly now he's passed away, Leonard Stern. He wrote The Smuggler's Brothers, The Honeymooners, a bunch of films. He introduced Sherry Lansing to the other side of the camera, first female chairperson of the studio. Look at this. He loved it. He didn't hear what those other guys heard, and this is funny, isn't it? Suits resisting, creatives actually accepting. He thought, and I think he's right, that what we do focuses on the script. It's the story, stupid. It's the underlying thing. And what we think we do, and what he recognized with a bit of persuasion, was that we focus on bringing out the best. And the best writers over time, not just in film, often benefit from the help of others who know something else. Even Jackson Pollock, they say, used to employ someone to take the canvas away so he didn't keep splattering it. So think of us as the splatter removers. But we're working with these guys to bring the best out. So I like this quote. I even like the other one. But more pertinent to us in a business viewpoint, this is the quote from the chairman of the studio for whom we do the most work. And he said this last year in introducing us to a very, very heavy-hitting American financier who was wondering about getting into film. And for many reasons, film financiers have been a bit nervous about that sector for a good 30 years now. And this is how he, our client, introduced us. We're shockingly accurate. And he meant in terms of making binary decisions, should we make this, should we invest in this film or not? And then if we do decide to, can we extract more value from making it appeal to a broader audience in the way that the audience would like it? Okay, so as you heard earlier, it's not just about the creator and what they want to do or what they want to do for their peer group. It's if you're making an entertainment, you have to entertain people. And I'm not saying that indie films or films which suit, perhaps me in my private life rather than me in my professional life, are bad in any way. We're just saying you've got to make the right film for the right audience, delivering the right amount of satisfaction, and it really should work from a business level, because if it doesn't, you won't be making many more films thereafter. Okay, so friends or foes? Are we friends or foes, the suits or the creatives? And I would argue, and it's been put to me, perhaps it's generational. Perhaps younger people understand how technology can help the creative process more than some of the suits and some of the writers that we meet around Hollywood movies. Or simply, we're friends with the audience, and we're standing in as their kind of proxy, if you like. But, you know, we think that we're friends of the Moneyball approach, and I now realise today Edward de Bono must be my best pal, based on what I've heard. Meany and the Meany, we're now good friends, I think, because the whole idea is that, you know, it's a collaborative thing, it's a team thing. And yes, you need vision, yes, you need the creative impulse, and yes, the people that instigate these films, most films, you know, are very admirable. It comes from somewhere, they've got energy, they've got life and vigour. We just help them make the best of it. Thank you very much.